Hello my friends and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 build guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today I'm covering the character in the game that without abusing any mechanics or specific item combos has the highest per turn damage output of any single character. As long as you're not abusing mechanics, this is going to be the most damage that you can get every single turn of a combat, and it can continue to do the same amount of damage forever, while also reaching the extremely high burst damage potential at the beginning of combats that's available to every paladin. It also gets to abuse some extremely powerful defensive mechanics, making your character extremely difficult to kill, getting incredible saving throws, as well as being out of reach of every other character in terms of damage output. I think there's one other vanilla combo that doesn't use any specific abusive mechanics that can match this, and I believe there are none that can exceed it, so we're really looking at the top tier of power level in terms of characters. To reach this, we are going to have to use a more specific setup than some of my other builds, so I'm going to be taking you through this build step by step in order very carefully. I'm using Minthara as the example character because this is going to be a Warlock Paladin multi-class build. It fits her very well, and also this build really reaches the peak of its power, or sort of comes online and starts reaching the breakpoint where it becomes extremely powerful relative to other characters around level 7, so that's about when you should be able to add Minthara to your party, so it's a really good fit for her as a build. You can certainly play this build from level 1, and it will also be very good doing that, although it does have a couple struggles in the very, very early game that you'll need to take some specific steps to overcome. I'll talk more about that as we go. Alright, so just to dive right into this, we are going to start level 1 as a Paladin. The reason for this is just getting heavy armor access. We will be using both Paladin and Warlock levels in an almost even split in order to maximize our damage output for the end game. So starting Paladin gets us access to heavy armor, which Warlocks don't naturally get, and obviously heavy armor is very good. There's some extremely powerful specific heavy armors that are also very good for this build later on. I will talk about a couple of them when we reach the end of the video, but for now, just bear in mind that this character also gets to have heavy armor, making it pretty solid defensively. Because you're going to be a two-handed weapon character operating in melee, you will end up with lower AC than many other melee characters. I talk a little bit about the downsides of this in my Paladin build, but all enemies will always have disadvantage to hit you, and you will never be able to be targeted by ranged attacks because this build gets to use darkness better than just about any other build in the game. And so for that reason, if you are playing this build as a main character, I recommend that you take Drow anyways, because additional casts of darkness are extremely powerful. Our Paladin subclass choice, I'm going to talk about this here, doesn't actually matter. The reason is that this build is going to use the secret 4th subclass available to Paladins, the Oathbreaker Paladin. If you don't want to use Oathbreaker for role-playing reasons, you will end up with a slightly lower power cap at the end of the build, but also some other additional utility from just your normal Paladin levels, and the best one is probably Oath of Vengeance. Just like other Paladins, this character really loves to have advantage on attacks because critical hits are so valuable to you. Paladins love critical hits because if you are using a smite attack, you're adding extra damage dice to every attack, and critical hits double damage dice, meaning that critical hit doubles your smite damage as well on Paladins. So one thing that we're keeping an eye out for over the course of the game is sources of advantage. Oath of Vengeance Paladins have a built-in way to gain advantage. So that's the best of these subclasses if you don't want to be an Oathbreaker, but to really cap out this build's power level, you should be an Oathbreaker. Our ability score is going to look extremely weird, and this is part of the very specific setup that you need to build this character. So we are going to clear this immediately, and I will reset everything back to 8s. We need as much Charisma and Constitution as we can get, because we are actually going to be using Charisma rather than Strength to deal our damage. Constitution, of course, is mandatory for every melee character in the game, as well as just every character. I think it is going to be extremely rare that I will post a build that doesn't start with 16 Constitution. In fact, I think I've posted precisely 0 builds that don't start with 16 Constitution. And also, because this character wants to maintain concentration on spells, at all times, because you have a couple spells that are extremely powerful to concentrate on, it's even more important that you get good saves from Constitution. And we will later be adding our Charisma to our saves as well, meaning that you'll very rarely fail a concentration check with this character. We also want as much Charisma as we can get because, of course, we're using that for our damage, and then you need a bunch of Dexterity. Dexterity is really good for initiative, and one thing this character will struggle with is initiative rolls, so I like to get 14 Dexterity even though we are in heavy armor. This will allow you to win initiative more often. You could, if you wanted to, lower your Dexterity, but I don't recommend it. For our last 4 points, we're going to put them all into Wisdom, leaving us with 8 Strength. If you are worried about your damage output at level 1, you could take a higher Strength build and be a little more effective at exactly level 1, and then respec into this stat spread later on. But I think you should probably just take this stat split and rely on Lae'zel and Shadowheart to see you through the Illithid Nautilus if you are worried about your level 1 combat effectiveness. For our skills, the only thing that really matters here is that this build does get good access to pushing and shoving if you use strength elixirs, so you can take athletics. If you're a main character, of course, you're going to want to have points in your conversation skills, and this build is excellent as a main character for the reason that it gets incredible charisma and great conversation skills throughout, so I like this build both for Minthara or for a main character. Alright, so that's our first level, and we are set up already very well to be going into our next level. At level 2, we're going to branch off from Paladin, and the reason for this, of course, is that we have this 16 Charisma, and so we need to be combat effective as early as possible. For that reason, we are going to jump straight into Warlock. Warlock, of course, uses Charisma as its casting stat, so now you're basically a level 1 Warlock with heavy armor, which is a totally reasonable thing to be at this point in the game. And you get access to Eldritch Blast, which will be your main combat mechanic for the first few levels. For your cantrip selection, of course, you're going to take Eldritch Blast, and I actually quite like having Blade Ward on this character. It's typically a poor action in combat, but you can pre-cast it ahead of combat to just gain 1 turn of damage resistance. It makes it harder for you to lose concentration on other spells. It's valuable for casters that intend to be in melee. Another option that is actually worth mentioning, and again, I know I joke about this one a lot, but Sources of Advantage are really powerful for paladins who really want to go fishing for crits, and you can take True Strike, cast it before combat, and have advantage on your attacks. Now, later on, you're going to have advantage on every attack from Darkness, so I wouldn't worry too much about this. It's better off to just you're better off taking Blade Ward, and generally I would advise against taking True Strike, but I just like to mention it because it really annoys some people in the comments. For our character subclass, because we will be making every attack with advantage and we'll be fishing for critical hits throughout the game, I actually think that even though we're a melee character, we're best off with Great Old One. Mortal Reminder is a very powerful effect. When you land a critical hit against a creature, they make a wisdom saving throw or become frightened until the end of their turn. Frightened is a really good condition, especially if you're a melee character, because enemies that can't move and have disadvantage on their attacks and ability checks are easy prey for your melee characters. So if you can get up on an enemy, hit them with a critical hit, and if they survive, which is, with this build, unlikely that they survive, but against certain bosses, maybe there's some that are not immune to Frightened, especially in the earlier game, this can be incredibly powerful. You can also throw a critical hit against one enemy, it will frighten everything around them, and then you move to the next enemy, trapping them in melee with you and preventing them from acting easily. So this is a very powerful effect, and it's basically free, so I really like to have that. For our spell selection for Warlocks, in the early game, you're going to want to have access to Hex. Hex is kind of the gold standard for damage in the early game. You use Hex plus Eldritch Blast, and 1d6 plus 1d10 damage at range in the early game is quite strong. And at this point in the game, you are not yet a melee character. You will only transition to being a melee character starting at character level 4 or Warlock level 3. So for now, we still want to maximize our Eldritch Blast damage so that you can make use of that. In addition, bonus action mobility is very powerful, so you could take Expeditious Retreat. Armor of Agathis will stay useful as you're a melee character throughout the game. This is a moderately effective spell that just gives you a little bit more HP. Generally speaking, I think you're going to want to choose one of those two for this build, and personally, I would just go with Expeditious Retreat. You will almost never cast your second Warlock spell at level 1, but it's possible that you'll want Expeditious Retreat for certain encounters, so I would just pick that one up. That being said, that second spell choice is not that important, so you should take what you consider to be most useful for you. Warlock level 2, we get access to Eldritch Invocations, which is where this character's charisma synergy really starts to come online, because we get to take Agonizing Blast. This will stay useful until the end of the game. It adds your charisma modifier to Eldritch Blast damage, and so this means that you are doing 1d10 plus 1d6 plus 3 damage with every ranged attack you're doing at this point, which is, again, very solid damage for this point in the game. It's better than a crossbow attack or something like that, pretty much equivalent to a rogue sneak attack, slightly worse than that, but with no conditions to apply it. So you're going to be able to keep up in terms of damage output with the other characters already. At later levels, Eldritch Blast starts firing multiple attacks with the same action. So when you hit level 5, and it's character level 5, not Warlock level 5, Eldritch Blast will fire 2 beams, and at level 11 it'll fire 3 beams, giving you access to 2 or 3 times your charisma damage on every Eldritch Blast attack. This is obviously super strong, and will allow you to apply your very high charisma over and over again, with Agonizing Blast even at range, making you a very solid and capable ranged attacker, who also at later levels will become the best melee damage dealer in the game. For our second Eldritch Invocation, you definitely want to take Devil's Sight. This allows you to cast Darkness, because it allows you to see in magical darkness, and stand in it, pepper enemies with agonizing blasts from within the darkness cloud, and they can't shoot back at you because you are inside of a cloud of darkness. As well, later on when we get access to better melee capabilities, if they come in after you, you will have advantage on every single attack, and they'll have disadvantage on every single attack, meaning that not only will you be out-damaging them, you will also have incredible defensive capabilities against them. With our heavy armor and disadvantage on every attack, enemies are going to hit you very rarely, and this additionally means that you will always hit enemies because you'll have advantage on every attack and get twice as many critical hits, which are extremely important for paladins. For our spell selection here, you just take whichever one you didn't take from the last level. And then we get to Warlock level 3. This is where the build starts really coming online, because we get this Pact boon. With Pact of the Blade Warlock, you can bind any weapon that you are holding as your Pact weapon. This means that instead of the normal stat it uses, strength for a non-finesse weapon or dexterity for a finesse weapon, it will use your casting stat, in this case charisma, to apply its attack and damage rolls. This means that with a two-handed weapon, with like this Warhammer, for example, you are doing 2d6 plus 4 and have plus 4 to hit, making you as good at melee combat as a dedicated fighter or paladin would be at this point, while not having had to put any points into strength. And this will get even better later on in the build. This lets you be a fully functional caster while also being a fully functional melee character, and is one of the real strengths of this build, in addition to the extreme levels of damage that it will get later on in the game. For our second level spell, you actually don't necessarily need to take Darkness from Warlock, although at this point in the game I will suggest taking it. It's so important to your build that you are really going to want to have access to this. And later on, you'll get other ways to cast it, but for now, Warlock spell slots are going to be your best way to cast it, and it's so valuable. This remains the single best defensive tool in the game, making you completely immune to ranged attackers, while also giving all melee enemies disadvantage against you, and you have advantage against them. Remember, at this point now, we are also applying our charisma to damage, so we're hitting harder than just about any other character, even starting at level 4. We also do want to replace a spell, because how Warlock spells work is you always cast your highest level spell, so you really want to get rid of these level 1 spells and replace them with level 2 spells. My pick here is you're going to want to replace Expeditious Retreat at this point for the much more valuable Misty Step. This gives you a mobility option that allows you to avoid having to actually move, and is just a way better mobility option. It's a bonus action that just teleports you 60 feet. This is going to be relevant throughout the game and is one of the best spells in the game, bar none, so is extremely valuable to have. At this point, there's a little bit of a split in the build. We could either go to Warlock level 4, basically to get our feat and increase our charisma to 18, which means that we would be applying +4 to every Eldritch Blast attack and every melee attack we made. Or we could take a second level of Paladin to gain access to smites. At this point, I think that you probably want to take your second level of Paladin, because smite attacks are so good, but which order you take these in is going to be somewhat interesting for you, and I recommend kind of figuring this one out as you go. That being said, before we take our second level of Paladin, there's something that we actually have to do, and I will show you how to do that now. So, at this point you should have access to respecking, which is very important to be able to do this. By the time you hit level 4 or 5, you should be able to respec your character easily. We need to break our Paladin Oath in order to become an Oathbreaker Paladin to get access to the things that lets you have. I will show you how to do that now. The easiest way to break your Paladin Oath is to slay an innocent character. And that's usually just any NPC. Unfortunately, we are in our camp, and so there's only one innocent around, so I'm going to have to do something somewhat unforgivable, and you may want to look away for the next 30 seconds of the video while we break our oath really quick. This part of the process is actually somewhat easy to mess up, so make certain you save before you do it. I actually messed up while recording this, so you'll probably have noticed a cut in the video there. The first thing that you need to do is go talk to Withers and respec your character back to level 1. This is especially important if you get Minthara with like her full levels of XP. Make certain that you are at level 1. We're going to be a level 1 paladin, making all of the same choices that we made last time. Confirm all of this. This should all be saved, and then save the game again. Do not level up your character and go break your oath. In order to do that, you need to kill an innocent, so I'm going to do that, and now is the time that you want to look away, probably.
If you insist. Death comes for them. What's this? Feels like
Alright, it's safe to look back, but we have broken our oath, and we should now have a conversation trigger. I'm going to skip this because there's a lot of story stuff, skipping through the dialogue as quickly as possible, both because it's very loud, weirdly louder than every other conversation in the game, and also because there's a lot of story stuff that I don't want to ruin if you haven't experienced it for yourself yet. After that conversation, when you go back to your camp, this guy should be somewhere hanging out in it, the Oathbreaker Knight. This guy will allow you to become an Oathbreaker Paladin, and we are at level 1. The reason we had to respec to level 1 is that once you are an Oathbreaker Paladin, you can no longer respec your character anymore again. You will be able to level up and take multi-class levels as you level up, but you won't be able to respec. So again, make certain that you save, and make certain you save every level for the rest of the game to avoid messing something up and having to redo your character from scratch, because you won't be able to respec. Go talk to this guy.
You called to me.
And then we just pass through this dialogue as quickly as possible.
Your oath is broken. Do not
Tell him you want to become an Oathbreaker. and then it will pop up this screen showing that you are becoming an Oathbreaker Paladin. This gives you access to the Spiteful Suffering action, which is fine, but it requires an action. It causes enemies to take some damage, and you have advantage on attacks against them. If you somehow can't reach an enemy to make a melee attack, this is fine, although you'll probably be better off just making an Eldritch Blast in that case. Overall, because this takes an action, it's significantly worse than the Vow of Enmity one, but the stuff that we get later on in Oathbreaker Paladin levels makes up for it. Alright, so we have done our respec, we are now an Oathbreaker Paladin, and we can resume leveling. We're going to take the same 3 Warlock levels that we took before, making sure that we make all of the same decisions in terms of spell access and everything. Oops, that's Witch Bolt, not Expeditious Retreat. Those icons look quite similar to me. And we take Devil's Sight and Agonizing Blast. Just remember to do that. Make sure that you are taking all of the same spells. Here we take Darkness again, although we will probably sub that out later on, and we sub out Expeditious Retreat for Misty Step. And we get Pact of the Blade. Alright, so now we're back where we were, but we're now an Oathbreaker Paladin. This lets us continue to level Paladin levels, but... Oh, here we go. Continue to level in Paladin, gaining access to smite attacks. Because we're a level 3 Warlock, we can use our Warlock spell slots as level 2 smites, and those recharge on a short rest. So now we have access to really high level smite attacks every single short rest, and can continue to make powerful smite attacks much more constantly than other characters can. We are going to also take the Great Weapon fighting style, which is another one of the great things that Paladin gets for this character, because this lets you reroll a 1 or 2 on a damage die when making an attack with a two-handed weapon. This is so good for Paladins because this includes damage dealt from your smites. So the additional 3d8 that we're doing on every smite attack is we also get to reroll the damage, making it the damage output of these both high and incredibly consistent. Because we're level 5 Drow, we also now get access to an additional once per day Darkness, which saves us from having to spend a Warlock spell slot on that, which is great. And we also get access to some Paladin spells to prepare. Bless is always good to have access to. This character will usually want to be focusing on Darkness, but it's never a bad thing to have Bless. You will certainly want Command. Command can cause an enemy to drop prone, and if you are, for example, hasted from an allied spellcast, you can cause an enemy to drop prone, wasting their next turn, and then attack them with advantage because they're prone on the ground. The rest of these options are not as important. Because our concentration is required for a lot of our other spells, we don't want to have to be concentrating on the unique smites, although Wrathful Smite having a Frightened option is pretty nice. Generally, after Command and Bless, the others fall down in power level significantly, but Protection from Evil and Good can come up sometimes, and Cure Wounds is never terrible to have access to, especially because as an Oathbreaker Paladin, we don't get healing from Lay on Hands, we instead get damage. Now we're going to go back to Warlock for 1 level, because this lets us get our ability score improvement, going up to 18 Charisma. One other thing that's worth mentioning is especially if you're a main character, is you could take a 17 Charisma split on this build. You would lose 2 points in Wisdom to take 17 Charisma, and then you could be up to 20 Charisma already if you take the Hag's Hair. Just worth mentioning that, although for Minthara you will not be able to do that because you can't have her by the time you are taking that deal. I guess actually you can if you as a temporary companion. So I'm genuinely not certain how that functions. If anybody knows how that functions, let me know. But for Minthara as a character, this probably is going to be, you're probably going to just be going up to 18 Charisma here. We take an additional cantrip, and at this point it doesn't really matter what you take, so take one of the utility cantrips like Mage Hand or Minor Illusion. For our spell selection, one that is extremely worth mentioning for paladins who have high charisma, like this paladin, and thus have good save DCs. Most paladins are going to want to max strength, and so won't have strong save DCs. But one other advantage this character gets is your save DCs will be just as good as any other spellcaster, which means that you can use stuff like Command and Hold Person. Hold Person takes your concentration, but guarantees critical hits against enemies that fail it. I talked already about how good critical hits are for this character, and so Hold Person lets you guarantee a critical hit on a smite attack, doubling the damage of your smites and increasing your damage output massively. We then go to Warlock level 5, because at Warlock level 5 we get the class feature from Pact of the Blade that lets you make a second attack with your Pact weapon. Once you are Warlock level 5, and this is about where the build really comes online, because we have 2 attacks, we have 3rd level smites from our level 3 Warlock spells, and we have all of the charisma to damage goodies that we've already mentioned. You are now as good or better than any other melee character, while also being a fully functional spellcaster at this point, and the build only gets stronger from here. For our level 3 spell, the most important one by far is to have access to Counterspell. Usually you're going to be spending your Warlock spell slots on Smite at this point, but Counterspell is of course very valuable. We also will never be casting Hex anymore, so we want to replace that, and my suggestion is to replace it with Hunger of Hadar. Hunger of Hadar is just a really good spell. It's a huge AoE, it does decent damage, and it blinds enemies. Usually you'll prefer Darkness, because you can safely stand in it yourself, but Hunger of Hadar is just a really good and really cool spell, so it's great to have access to. For our Eldritch Invocation, you are going to want Repelling Blast. This gives you quite a bit of utility with your Eldritch Blasts, because you can cast them and knock an enemy back 15 feet, knocking them off of cliffs, into abysses, or just repositioning them into, say, your Hunger of Hadar that you have on the field, or an allied wall of fire, stuff like that. The ability to reposition enemies is always powerful and something you should keep an eye out for on every character. Now we're done with our Warlock levels and can go back to taking levels in Paladin. Oh, I always hit the wrong button there. At Paladin level 3, we get access to some Oath spells. These are not particularly important. We also get immunity to disease, which gives you a couple small advantages, but again is not terribly important. Dreadful Aspect is quite good. Frightened is a very powerful condition for enemies, and this one is a wisdom save based on your charisma, so we, unlike most paladins, are going to have, again, good save DCs, because we're raising our charisma as high as it can go. And so the ability to frighten enemies within 30 feet in an AoE is hugely powerful. Prepared spells, again, the level 1 spells don't matter, and you're also going to be spending these level 1 spell slots either on Command or on Smites. Remember, you don't have to spend your Warlock slots on Smite. You can also spend your Paladin slots on Smite if you want to use a Smite attack at a lower level, and that's a very valuable thing to do if you want those resources. Here, of course, we get to raise our charisma up to maximum. If you used Anti-Ethel's Deal, then you're going to want to take Alert as your feat, because Alert gives you fixes the initiative issues that are basically this build's only weakness. So definitely keep that in mind. Alert is probably the single most powerful feat in the game by a significantly wide margin, so you should always keep an eye out for the ability to fit this in. And if you're doing this as a solo character, I should mention also this is one of the better solo characters in the game as well. Maybe the best. It's very much worth doing. Here we get access to our 2nd level Paladin spells, as well as extra attack. The extra attack from Paladin 5 and Warlock 5 stack. This gives us 3 attacks every round, something that we are getting earlier than any other character has access to. Fighters get this at level 11, we get it at level 10, and we're making all these attacks based off of our casting stat while being a fully functional spellcaster. We also get some higher level spells. The level 2 spells, again, you don't really want these special smites, because you don't want to concentrate on that. You'd rather be concentrating on darkness pretty much always. So I would take stuff like, I'd typically prepare stuff like Aid, which can be used to help mitigate. It's pretty good damage mitigation if you have some summons in your party, and good for allies. Lesser Restoration can be quite useful in certain combat scenarios. Generally, you're going to want to pick a bunch of utility spells from this thing, because the only spells you're actually casting for their effect is Command, and maybe occasionally Bless. At level 6 Paladin, we get another one of the best class features in the game, Aura of Protection, and you get to use this even better than other Paladins do. This says +0, but it's lying. It's a plus your Charisma modifier to saving throws, so this is going to give you +5 to all your saves, making you the character, and all your party's saves, making you the character with the best saving throws in the game. At this point, you are never going to fail a concentration check, because you are going to have +8 to all of your concentration checks, which is extremely strong. And you also have proficiency in wisdom saves, meaning that you will never fail the very dangerous effects that target wisdom. Wisdom is usually the most important of the 6 saving throws. Constitution and dexterity are the other 2 most important, so that's part of why we have those stats so high, and never failing a save against a wisdom targeting effect is very valuable for this character. And finally, at character level 7, we get the reason that we are in the Oathbreaker Paladin, and that is Aura of Hate. Remember, you have to turn this on. It does not stay turned on by default, or it doesn't start turned on by default, which is kind of annoying. And this will give you an additional your Charisma in damage to every weapon attack. So now we will be adding double our Charisma to every weapon attack for a +10 bonus to everything. You can also, at this point, if you wanted to, and took Ethel's Deal, rather than Alert, you could take Great Weapon Master for an additional +10 damage, doing +20 damage on every attack. Both of those are extremely powerful options, and because you're going to have advantage on every attack, you are very likely to hit with your Great Weapon Master attacks, so that's something else to keep in mind. With the default build, without using Ethel's Deal, you are going to end up with massive damage bonus from your Charisma, as well as your Smite attacks on every round, and let's put it all together. So first off, you have to activate your class abilities with Pact of the Blade. Oh, not that one. This one is always a little bit confusing. You have to bind Pact Weapon. So once this is marked, it's going to be using your Charisma to damage, so notice that we're doing 2d6 +5 there, rather than the -1 we would be doing if it was using our Strength. And then if I activate Aura of Hate, which we can find here, we will be doing 2d6 +10. So let's attack something just to show that off. So that was 17 damage just from a normal attack, and that was on fairly low damage rolls, and you can do that 3 times a round. So let's do that. The average damage output from your rounds where you don't spend any smites is 30 plus 21, so 51 average damage from not spending any smites, and that's obviously incredibly good. If you want to spend smites, you have 2 level 3 smites every short rest, as well as some additional level 1 and 2 smites, giving you access to massive damage output, and that's before any bonuses or critical hits or anything. Something that you are really going to want to do on this character is to, here, I guess we're going to show 3 weapon attacks in one round. 1, 2, and notice that we can still do a third. Break this desk. Oh, we can't break the desk. The desk is invincible. So, unlike every other character, we get 3 weapon attacks in a round. If you're hasted, you get 6 weapon attacks. So, this character wears haste extremely well. Potions of speed or potions of bloodlust will be your friend on this character. Elixirs of bloodlust and potions of speed. You can do both for 3 actions per round, giving you 9 total attacks for an average damage output over 150 before spending any smite resources. You also get to do all of this within a darkness cloud. Notice that we aren't blinded, but the Oathbreaker Knight is, and so when we go to attack him, we will have advantage on our attacks, and if he were to hit us back, he would have disadvantage on his attacks. Put together, this character is one of the just most broken possible characters in the game, a build I really wanted to show you guys. For itemization, you really don't have to do anything specific. A two-handed weapon that has multiple damage dice, so a maul or a greatsword is recommended because it plays very well with Great Weapon Master. You're more likely to reroll. And anything that gives you guaranteed critical hits, like this Killer's Sweetheart Ring, is going to be very valuable as well. Also, you'll likely want to drink an Elixir of Bloodlust for additional actions, and a Potion of Speed for haste in important fights. Alright, my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this look at the extremely powerful Oathbreaker Lock-it-in, and as always, if you have enjoyed the video, do please feel free to leave a comment, like the video, and you can subscribe to my channel for more builds like this, basic builds for every class, lore-friendly builds for every character, and other strategy game content not in Baldur's Gate. I also have a couple more fun things in Baldur's Gate coming up, so keep an eye out for those. We will be doing some things that aren't just build guides as well, and I'm really excited to bring you those. Alright, my friends, hope you've enjoyed the video, and I will catch you next time.